They say California likes to lead the way, but this time it's leading us back to the legislature. That's right, folks. Voters just passed Proposition 50, letting lawmakers take the redistricting pen back from the state's independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. For 2 decades, California bragged about doing redistricting the right way. No backroom deals, no gerrymandering, just citizens drawing the lines. And now we're back to politicians mapping their own districts. So, before we kick off today about Prop 50, I feel like a lot of people probably have heard of it. Let's talk about gerrymandering in general and how it became, because I think this is one of the funnier stories in politics. I won $50 in a bet with my husband over where gerrymandering came from because he didn't believe me because it's such a silly story. So, Stephen, do you know the origin of gerrymandering?
I do, but why don't you regale us with the tale?
It is all about a salamander, essentially, and a man named Jerry, which, okay, gerrymandering. But it also dates back to 1812, which is a long time ago. This term is over 200 years old, and its origins are in Boston with the Boston Gazette. And so there was this political cartoon that the Boston Gazette published back then that was depicting a new species of monster, the gerrymander. Which, okay, here we go. And this fork-tongued creature that they had in this Boston Gazette article was shaped like a contorted Massachusetts voting district that the state's Jeffersonian Republicans had drawn to benefit their own party. So this was kind of the beginning of these really crazy districting lines. It's really funny when you actually zoom in on these districts in our country because you would think that they are the least normal way to divvy up land. They're all weird and this and that and the other. And this specifically looked like a salamander. And the governor and future president, Elbridge Gerry, signed off on his party's redistricting of this in February, and he kind of unwittingly cemented his place in history and the United States lexicon for this kind of underhanded political trick. And that is the way that a lot of people have seen this in the past. And California, who has always touted that they don't do that, has kind of taken it back. So it's a very interesting time, and we're seeing a lot of redistricting fights open up.
So, yes, it is interesting that the phrase gerrymander is an American phrase, but it's used all over the world now. Certainly in the UK, that's what we use it, and I think you'll find in other languages even the word has sort of entered the lexicon as well. But it comes from America because no other country in the Western democratic world would dream of doing anything like this because it's so wildly undemocratic and so wrong just on so many levels. And I remember when I first found out that it was actually perfectly legal and constitutional for the ruling party to divide up the districts in a way that benefits themselves, which is just insane. It's insane. So in the UK, of course, we have districting, but of course we have an independent redistricting commission in the way that California has it, as everywhere. And I remember the last time we actually redistricted, it was quite a long time ago. It was back during oh God, it's about at least 10 years ago now, if not more. And it was quite an awkward time because we hadn't redistricted for a long time before that. And it turned out that the new maps that were drawn by this independent commission greatly benefited the Conservative parties. Obviously, the Labour Party, well, I quite aggrieved by it, but there wasn't a lot they could say. The reason it benefited the Conservative Party was that over time, just demographic changes and people moving around meant that the Conservatives were actually being disadvantaged by the present maps. So therefore, they were made fair, which actually benefited the Conservative Party. So there wasn't a lot that anyone could say about it. And that's how it should be.
Yes.
It should be. But the interesting thing about America is because of the way the American political system works, in particular, where you take a state and then split it up into different districts for the House, makes it actually quite difficult to come up with a fair map. It's much easier elsewhere. So in the UK, we just divide the whole country up into 650 constituencies. And it's quite easy then to just come up with logical sizes, logical areas that encompass roughly the same amount of people, which is the key thing, isn't it? You want each district to have roughly the same amount of people. So an urban district is going to be much smaller than a rural district, so that you can get roughly the same amount of people in it. But it's quite difficult to do that And you have to think about, do you want your actual districts to reflect the population, or do you want them to reflect the actual vote share? Or do you just want them to be convenient sizes and shapes for the actual politicians to be able to run about and speak to a lot of people? Like, you want them contiguous, don't you? You don't want a bit of my district here and then a bit of my district up there, because that would just be really odd. But if you want the districts to actually reflect voter share, then sometimes that's what you have to do, particularly in smaller states where there are only a handful of representatives. So it's actually more difficult than it seems to come up with a fair map. But certainly you shouldn't allow the ruling party to draw the maps. That's crazy.
Right. And one of the issues with gerrymandering specifically is the way that they're drawing them are also trying to dilute the power of votes in different areas by taking little tiny like tabulations of a liberal area and then spreading that across a very like intense conservative area to kind of dilute the power of those votes. And so when you look at the new maps of California, you'll see very funny little things that kind of go down the side, and they'll tap a little bit of a area that seems to be very blue. It's a city, and then it will be distributed to an area that may be a little bit more right leaning. And so that's also why we get these really weird shapes here. One, people don't live one person every 5 square feet or anything like that. We have towns, and land doesn't vote, so it's not super weird, especially in the US, because it is so big that some of them would look a little weird. But you get into some really funny, hilarious salamander-like looking maps when you actually get into how this works.
The theory behind it actually is to try and make districts, the share of House seats, reflect the vote share within the state. So if 40% of people are voting Democrat in a particular state, that the Democrats should have 40% of the House seats. And to make that work, sometimes you need to draw weird districts just to sort of make sure that it's not being unfair. But of course, that's not what happens. But in the partisan world we live in, you have the ruling party doing two things really: making sure they've got the maximum number of seats, but also making as many seats as possible safe. And that's the other problem with this, because in a democracy, you actually want seats to be competitive, because then politicians actually have to listen to the people. If they know they're going to face a serious challenge at the next election, they're going to be much more aligned with what the voters want. Whereas in the House, there are a vast number of seats that are so safe that the politicians know they never need to worry at all about their electorate, because they're always going to get elected. And in fact, they only just they worry more about primary challenges than they do the actual general elections, which is again is a craziness. So yeah, gerrymandering is just weird. I don't understand why the United States hasn't got rid of it. And I don't understand why everywhere doesn't do what California did.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's going to be a lot more movement like that. I think Democrats for a long time have tried to go on this high road, and it's not really serving them very well. And if the other side is willing to, dilute the vote of people to retain and gain power, then, I guess all's fair. I'm loving war.
Well, I read a really interesting Matthew Iglesias article about this actually, and I agree with him. I think his conclusion was the only way to do it properly is to switch to a proportional representation system of voting, where basically each state has an election, and you say, okay, so within this whole state, 40% of the votes were for the Democrats, and therefore we're just going to apportion 40% of the seats, or however many seats there are in this state, to the Democrats. And individual legislators don't have individual districts in that way. Now, that's a disadvantage because you don't have your own constituency, your own unique constituency, but you can work that out. There's plenty of places around the world that have that. And that's really the best way to do it. So that's what America needs to do. Change your voting system.
One thing that I always want is for us to become a coalition government. So here we are.
Yes.
If we weren't just a two-party system, we probably wouldn't have this problem either. Okay, well, let's get into the topic at hand today, Prop 50. So what on earth happened here, and how did this switcheroony come to be?
Yes, so this has been a huge story. So most people, I think, are probably familiar with it. But let's just run through the basics of this. So California has basically built its reputation on fair maps. This was following a period back in the 2000s, in which California was infamous for terrible gerrymandering. And so in the early 2000s, voters passed Props 11 and 20, which were known as the Voters' First Acts. And they kicked lawmakers out of the process completely and they handed it to a citizen-led commission. And that's worked really well. And everyone agrees that the maps that have been used since then in California are, broadly speaking, very fair. But if you fast forward to 2025, political reality intrudes into this cozy situation. So at the behest, obviously, of President Trump, who was a little bit concerned about losing the House in the midterms next year, states like Texas geared up for mid-decade redraws to boost Republican seats in Congress. Now, this, of course, goes against what usually happens where the actual maps are only redrawn following a census, which makes sense. The census tells you how many people there are, so therefore you redraw your maps to match whatever that reality is at the time. So in response to this, California Democrats, of course, said, well, two can play at that game. So Proposition 50 was framed as a defensive maneuver, so not a power grab by California Democrats, but a protection of California's representation. It was carefully designed to exactly counteract the 5 extra seats that Texas redistricting has created for the Republicans by creating an extra 5 Democratic seats in California.
All right, so are we calling it defensive gerrymandering now? I think this might be FAFO gerrymandering.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
But I mean, this is bold and also feels very 2025 in just the weirdest way to attack a problem. Instead of just doing the right thing, we're circumventing and trying to balance the scales through some interesting stuff. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's walk through what actually got passed, because this wasn't just a single measure. There was kind of a whole legislative package behind it, right?
Yes, exactly. So Prop 50 didn't just appear out of thin air. It was built on 3 big bills that we can talk about. But let's just quickly compare it to what happened in Texas. So in Texas, of course, there was no need for a vote from the people because there was no sort of constitutional amendment necessary. All that was needed was that the legislature actually voted on the new map. And obviously the Democrats in Texas were so outraged that the Texas Republicans are actually daring to redistrict in this way that they all left the state and disappeared, and there was a massive crisis. The entire special session collapsed because there were no Democrats there, and they were going to have them arrested and dragged back to the state. Yeah, exactly. So it was a huge deal. Eventually, the Democrats said, and went back, and there was another special session. They did actually vote on the maps, and the maps got done. So it was all very, very dramatic. Now, the California situation was far more relaxed, I would say, and far more straightforward. It followed a much more normal system. So first of all, you had Assembly Constitutional Amendment 8, or ACA 8, which temporarily handed redistricting power back to the legislature. So that took it away from this independent commission. Then you had Senate Bill 280, which set up the procedures for the change, and Assembly Bill 604, which called the special election and defined how the new maps would be drawn and implemented. So together, these 3 pieces of legislation made up a carefully choreographed legislative move. In the end, the package passed with 2/3 majorities in both chambers, 57 to 20 in the Assembly, 30 to 8 in the Senate. So every Democrat but one, Jasmeet Bains, voted yes. Fun fact, why did Jasmeet Bains vote no? Well, she's running for Congress in a fairly tight district, but I'm sure that had nothing to do with her decision to oppose this and be the one Democrat standing out.
Pure coincidence, I'm sure. Okay, so the legislator tees it up, Newsom signs off, and voters get Prop 50 on the November 2025 ballot. How did the campaign play out around this?
Well, it got pretty hot, pretty fast, actually. So supporters, who were mostly Democrats and allied groups, pitched Prop 50 as a patriotic measure, California standing up for fair representation when others won't. That was Governor Newsom's line. Opponents, though, led by Republicans and the good governance watchdog, saw it differently. They called it a partisan power grab that would undo the trust that had been built up by the Independent Commission over decades. Editorial boards across the state warned it would erode confidence and open the door to the same backroom politics the state swore off 15 years ago. So, a classic California political showdown. Both sides claiming they're protecting democracy, just in very different ways.
Yes, indeed. And the voters went for it. It passed by kind of an overwhelmingly 63.9% yes. And that is a landslide, even if the turnout was only 35%. But for a single question special election, that is a lot of Californians showing up to say, sure, legislature, let's take back this pen. So what happens next here is AB 604 already defined the new map, right?
Yes, that's right. So it's all done and dusted now. The new
Okay.
congressional map is drawn. It's locked in for 2026, 2028, and 2030 elections. So taking it basically right up to the next census in 2030. And then
Mm.
after that census, the power will be handed back to this independent redistricting commission. So Ballotpedia ran some fascinating analysis showing exactly how it shifts the balance. So under the new map, 5 Republican-held districts would lead more Democratic. So Kamala Harris would have carried 3 of these new districts by over 10 points in the 2024 presidential results. So that's sort of switching from Republican to Democrat. District 48 becomes a 3-point Democratic lean, so a bit narrower. And District 22 moves 4 points towards the Democrats, though Trump would still have taken that one by 2 points. But, and it's a big but, that advantage is quite fragile. By
Mm.
concentrating Democratic voters into those flip districts, they actually weaken margins elsewhere. So Ballotpedia found that at least 5 other Democratic districts would have smaller majorities if these different constituencies had been in play during 2024. So it is a risky thing to do. California Democrats may have grabbed a few potential gains, but at the cost of thinning out their safety margin in other seats. So it's like trying to stretch a blanket that's just a little bit too small.
Yes, classic redistricting irony. The more you tweak, the more you risk breaking your own design. All right, so this isn't happening in isolation. Texas has redrawn mid-decade to generate these extra 5 seats, and other states are also considering doing the same. It sounds like their redistricting version of kind of mutually assured destruction is going on.
Yes, exactly. So it's a political arms race. But of course, mutually assured destruction is supposed to ensure that the war never happens. But this is the war
Mm,
actually happening. And
yeah.
you're seeing this mutually assured destruction actually play out, just with district maps instead of missiles. So luckily, no one's dying. But each side does claim the moral high ground. Republicans claim to be addressing existing maps that they consider unfair. A little bit of a tiny fig leaf for the fact that President Trump told them to do it, so they're doing it. But Democrats see it as an attack on democracy that needs to be thwarted. So, one interesting side effect, though, to all of this in all these different states may be to actually reduce the number of very safe seats by, as we've just seen with the California ones, you reduce overall majorities in some of these seats that the party's already taken. And it may therefore inject some much needed competitiveness into future elections, particularly if the political wind switches definitively against either party over the coming years. So, therefore, that seats that were fairly safe right now may not be so safe in 2 or 4 years' time.
Right. So it's an interesting situation where they had a lot of eggs in baskets. They knew they had safe seats. Now they're trying to grab some more areas. There's more up for
Hmm.
grabs, more or less, because they are more diluted. So we should hopefully see some more interesting times in our politics and maybe some of those geriatric people getting out of there. But we'll see.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
all right. So
I mean, this is why this hasn't happened actually in the past, because you
mhm.
would think one of the questions you can ask about this is, okay, so if Texas can redraw its map to give itself, so the Republicans can give themselves 5 extra seats, why didn't they do that before? And the reason they didn't do it before, of course, is because all of those sort of Republican politicians whose margins would be decreased wouldn't vote for it. So with redistricting, it's always quite a battle within the party to say, okay, yeah, we want to get the maximum number of seats, but at the same time, we don't want to diminish our majorities so much that we actually have to fight in the next election. No, we want it to
Right.
be a done thing. It's a risky move.
Right. I wonder how term limits would impact gerrymandering. Anyways.
Yes,
All right, so
another
the
question.
geographic split on Prop 50 is pretty telling too. The regions that are most likely to flip under the new maps, the northern and inland areas, voted against Prop 50. So the voters most affected were the least enthusiastic around it. And that's kind of a poetic and a slightly tragic way. I'm not sure.
Yeah, almost Shakespearean. Understandable, of course. These are the areas with a lot of Republican voters who stand to lose their Republican representatives and have to put up with those nasty Dems instead. So it's a reminder that every redistricting reform, even one wrapped up in fairness and democracy, comes down to who holds the pen. And you're going to annoy voters on one side or the other. So in 2025, California decided the pen belongs once again to the politicians, and unfortunately, those voters who would rather elect Republican representatives, they're out of luck.
All right. What's next here? Does this open the door for more blue states to follow suit? Do we think this is just going to devolve into chaos? I mean, if people are redistricting, not even with the census, this seems like people could be redistricting the moment before every House race for every 2 years for the rest of infinity of time.
Yeah.
Like, this seems very bad and stressful.
Yes, it is. As with many things, it's a bit of a Pandora's box, isn't it? Because once you've done it, what's to stop you doing it again in the future, as you say? You are setting a precedent. Mid-decade redistricting isn't just for Texas anymore. It's no longer beyond the pale and a terrible thing that you shouldn't do. If the new California map holds up and helps Democrats gain seats in 2026, don't be surprised if states like New York or Illinois start eyeing their own temporary adjustments. Republican efforts, of course, are already going way beyond Texas. So other Republican legislators are already drawing new maps and passing them. And if they do, Democrats may well feel obliged to respond.
Yeah, I think we're definitely getting into an area where people thought that they were kind of holding the moral high ground for the sake of doing so. And if anything this year has shown us is the moral high ground is worth literally nothing. And we just gotta figure it out, because you can either have the high ground and watch everything slip away from you, or kind of get down into the dirt and see what you can fight for, I guess.
And that's sort of like Gavin Newsom's slogan at the moment, isn't it? It's not like when they go low, we go high. It's like when they go low, I'm getting right down there with them, and I'm going to beat them at their own game. And it's proving quite popular amongst Democrats. I think Democrats generally are just a bit tired of feeling that their politicians always play by the rules and lose. And so they're saying, no, do what you need to do in unfair situations like this. The biggest question, of course, is whether Congress or the courts step in to actually curb this tit-for-tat cycle. I'm not exactly sure what kind of legal challenges could be brought here, because obviously gerrymandering generally has been tested in the courts over and over again, and the courts agree that the only reason why you can't gerrymander is along racial lines. So as long as you're not deliberately trying to disenfranchise a particular racial group, then you're fine. But otherwise, every state could be redrawing maps whenever the political wind shifts, and that will be chaos disguised as strategy. And again, is just even more wildly undemocratic than the current gerrymandering.
Yes. All right. So we've come full circle. The experiment in citizen-led redistricting ends with the legislature reclaiming control temporarily, they promise. So if California wanted to make a statement about protecting democracy, it's definitely kind of a complicated, nuanced one.
It is. Obviously, the laws that they passed, those bills that they passed, do hand back control to the Independent Commission in 2030, but no reason why they can't pass more bills to change that, particularly if this thing becomes a regular thing. Then who knows? But California is saying, we do believe in fairness. There are times when fairness has to take a back seat, though, just so you can actually win the battle. And the California voters went for it, as we saw. It was a convincing win, and a lot of Californians, obviously, they really do like the Independent Redistricting Commission. So actually switch their views in this way, show that they are actually behind the Democrats on this one.
And right, it is fairness if you look at it from the national scale. Texas took 5, California took 5, so that, nets out. But then if you go inside the state, then it doesn't feel fair. So I mean, it's just... We are certainly living in interesting times. I do wonder what Elbridge Gerry would have thought of this all. But that is it for this episode of Beyond the Bill Number. If you want to dig deeper into the bills behind Prop 50, ACA 8, SB 280, and AB 604, you can find them all at BillTrack50.com. And remember, we're always looking beyond that bill number here. It might be within a state or across the whole nation, but there is a lot happening behind all of the different moves that we're seeing in Congress. So it's always a great time to tune in.
It is. Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time.